just to lay back down and say, I won't be coming back. Let's call it a heart attack. Give me some of that knack. This is just a final payback. They all flipped on me, took my passions, left me be. When I had a place to sit, goddamn attitude to fit. Talk just knew where to spit. Things have changed and I've quit. Got nothing to look forward to but backlash full of lies. You're too late where you're going. This is fate, the whistle's blowing. It's much too late, it's too late. You're much too late. Like this whole punk with.
And welcome to a brand new life, to a brand new day, all the way from the wastelands of California. My name is Michael, and I'm a mere figment of your imagination. I look forward to once again serve you those sounds of salvation. First-time listeners, turn on, tune in, and drop out. This is a very different kind of show, a place where we don't feel so alone. Let us chase away the light no matter what you at home choose to believe. I do admire you for your curiosity. Joining me tonight is Benjamin Fulford. He draws assignment for this evening. Benjamin is a respected journalist and reporter. His sources come from very, very high places. He is a former author and writer for Forbes magazine. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for allowing me into your hearts and into your minds. Here we are again on a night like this. Don't forget, you too can get involved. Your phone calls are always needed. That number is 760-332-8724. Don't be afraid. That number is 760-332-8724. Now let's bring in Mr. Benjamin Fulford. Benjamin, what's going down?
Nothing. I'm waiting for you.
Perfect. Konnichiwa, my friend.
Konnichiwa.
Yes, welcome to End of Days. Thank you for being here. I truly appreciate you spending your morning here with us all. Yes, and how are you, Ben, by the way? What's going on over there?
Well, it's a fine day here, and I just come back from walking my dogs and nice spring weather. So life is good.
Perfect. I'm so glad it's going well for you. And I wanted to get things started tonight by just asking you about yourself, Ben, and what you represent.
Okay. Well, I have been a journalist for all my career, but I got involved in political activism because I was invited to join a secret elite and told that they had a plan to, cull 90% of the world's population. I have this on tape. I can prove it in a court of law. And so I found myself forced into a fight against this group that were planning this, who I suppose you could call them the Nazis, or I started to use the phrase Khazarian mafia to identify this group of people to avoid, associating them specifically Germans or Jews.
Understood, yes.
But, I'm a journalist, so I get my stuff firsthand. I don't, read stuff on the internet and regurgitate it. I actually talk to people in power, and so, I've been in this fight now for at least 11 years against these people, and fortunately we're winning. The plan to start World War III has been stopped. And this, you can forensically prove this. Okay, since Bush Jr. stole the election in the year 2000.
Agreed.
They had their 9/11 Reichstag fire. Then they imposed a law, the Patriot Act, which is exactly identical to the Nazi laws. And then they built, germ warfare laboratories all over the world and tried to spread bioagents like SARS and weaponized bird flu. Ebola, etc. This is well documented. And they also they paid a huge amount of money to farmers so they would stop growing food and grow so-called bioethanol, and they tried to cause starvation crises in 33 countries. And then we've seen multiple attempts to start World War III in North Korea, with Iran, in Syria, and it's all been stopped. So the situation we find ourselves in now is what to do next. How to change the structure of world power that was put in place after World War II, and I'm involved in these discussions.
Understood. And one interesting thing about you that I saw on your website is that you went to live with a tribe when you were only 17 years old in, I guess, the Amazon. I'm very, yeah, I'm very curious how that went about for you. Can you expand on that?
Sure. The thing is, I kind of came from a hippie generation, and the gestalt was that if you went to university, you'd be brainwashed and turned into a consumer. This is sort of like the high school gestalt where I was at. So I decided that if I wanted to learn about civilization, the best thing to do would be to get out of civilization. And I was, influenced by books by Carlos Castaneda about studying with a shaman. So I decided to go study with a Shipibo shaman, and that's why I went to the Amazon. I stayed with the Shipibo Indians on the Ucayali River. They used to be cannibals.
I see.
Because in the rainy season, they couldn't get protein. The fish were hard to find, and so they go eat their neighbors. But by the time I was with them, they had access to canned fish. But anyone older than 40 had been a cannibal when they were young. And I guess the most important lesson I learned there, you can call it economics 101.
Yes.
Is their diet consisted mainly of fish and bananas. So you'd have roast bananas and fish soup, or roast fish and banana soup, or fish and banana soup. You get the idea. So,
and indeed, I'm just curious that at such a young age, you were so open-minded, especially enough to go head on all the way out there, my friend.
Well, my father was a Canadian diplomat, and I'd sort of grown up in Cuba, Mexico, and Canada. And I'd also spent a lot of time in the Canadian wilderness since I was a kid, with bears and wolves and stuff. So wilderness was kind of second nature.
Second nature, yes. Understood.
And I hitchhiked up from Buenos Aires, where my father was, to Peru, to the Amazon, and then I got a ride on a boat. So that's how I got there. I didn't go all the way, But let me get back to that story, because
yes, sir.
I was sick of the fish and bananas, and so I said, let's go eat meat. And I said, all right, let's go hunting. And we went deep into the jungle, and at a certain point, I was too loud and awkward and smelly. They said, just sit here and wait. And they went off, and they couldn't find anything. We spent the whole day, trudging around, and we couldn't get anything. Go back. I'm really hungry. There's nothing to eat, because we didn't catch anything. This is the sort of thing that you forget when you're in a modern industrial civilization. You can go to the convenience store and get whatever, whenever. Right?
Yes.
But at the end of the day, we rely on the natural world for our food, and that's the main lesson I got from the Amazon. I mean, there are a lot of other ones, of course, but and the other thing was that I could see this was the kind of the frontier of what you could call Babylonian civilization. There, in the nearby port town of Pucallpa, there was like a neighborhood that looked like a modern American neighborhood. And it was full of these Christian missionaries whose job was they wanted to translate the Bible into every language on earth. And they'd go around and they'd find these uncontacted tribes, and then first the tribes would shoot spears and arrows at their plane as they flew over, and they dropped like bags full of kicking pots, mirrors, machetes and stuff, and microphones. And they would try to figure out the language with the microphones. And then eventually, because they gave gifts, they're hoping they could make a friendly approach. They'd land. And sometimes they would be, speared on the spot, and sometimes they were able to try to convert them to Christianity. But, the Indians were very skeptical of all this, or the natives, I don't know what you want to call them, but and I realized also that this was just behind these missionaries were these, logging and oil companies and stuff, right? And it's sort of like they're trying to create, brainwashed slaves so they could exploit resources. It's sort of a scary machine when you're seeing it from the inside the jungle, looking out in.
True.
And that's why I realized, there's something fundamentally wrong with Western civilization as it was functioning at the time, in that it was destroying the natural world and also creating humongous inequalities. I mean, especially that's really evident in South America, where you have these ultra rich, and then you have these people scrabbling in shanty towns and not much in between, But eventually I understood that, this was also the gestalt in South America, is that somehow Asia had the key to help. And so I decided to go to Asia to try to get help to change the situation. And essentially 30 years later, that's what I'm doing,
Yes. And how did you first get involved with Forbes, by the way?
Well, I went to university in Japan, and at the time I graduated, it was around mid-'80s, I was a fairly rare Westerner who could pick up a Japanese newspaper and read it. And so I got a job with Knight Ridder Financial News as part of the Knight Ridder news chain that owns the Miami Herald and a bunch of U.S. papers. And so I was a correspondent for various different papers, the South China Morning Post, and then Japan's largest economic daily, the Nikkei. And so it's a small world of foreign correspondence. When I heard there was opening at Forbes, I put my name in the hat and got the job. And so that's how I got that. And I was there Asia Pacific Bureau Chief, I think, for close to 8 years.
That's pretty incredible. And Ben, the first time I heard of you was back in 2007, when at the time I didn't exactly explore too many researchers out there or journalists myself, but I did in fact hear your interview with David Rockefeller, and I just kept wondering, how on earth did he pull that off? That's pretty incredible.
Okay. Well, let me explain how, this is where I kind of entered the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And what happened was that Finance Minister Heizo Takenaka, this is around year 2000, just after 9/11, had the whole time I'd been a business reporter in Japan. Japan's economic landscape was dominated by something called cross-shareholding. The big companies and banks owned each other's shares, so foreigners couldn't come in and take over. And when Takenaka came into power, he basically handed over all the control of the corporations to these foreign hedge funds. And when I studied these hedge funds and followed the paper trail, it led to a bunch of foundations, and then the paper trail led to, people like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. And when I confronted Heizo Takenaka in an interview about this, and I have a recording of this interview, well, later I was told that, he had no choice. They'd been threatened with earthquake machines, which at the time, this was way out there for me, right? It's like, what,
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing that for the Japanese, they said, you're ruled by people like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. Those are your rulers, right? And as a Forbes writer who writes about billionaires, I thought, okay, well, they're like an old money. They're like number 300 in the list. They're like past tense. Well, why do the Japanese think this, And I had to go back to the 1918 edition of Forbes magazine to find that the John Rockefeller I had basically suddenly become poor overnight because he donated all his money to foundations. And once you put the money in a foundation, you don't have to pay inheritance tax and you don't have to really disclose anything. And I realized that there was like hundreds of foundations, and they all led to the small group of families. And so there were actual trillionaires out there, not just billionaires. And again, I followed the paper trail. I didn't, just read this on some site. When I started this, for example, when I looked up Rothschild on the internet, there was exactly one sentence in the entire internet. It was an Israeli chat board with one line saying there's a rumor that they helped found Israel. That's it. Now, of course, there's like 6 million pages about these people, but at the time it was nothing. It was like a blank. Nobody knew about this. So, getting back to Rockefeller, what happened after that was after I confronted Heizo Takanaka, I got called by a man who said he was sent by Takanaka, Heizo. He was from the Japan Development Bank. Again, I have all this on tape.
Yes.
And paper trail. And I met in a hotel room with this guy called Shiramine, who described himself as a ninja, which is, again, what the hell?
Yeah.
And basically, he said that I would, be offered the job of finance minister of Japan, just like Heizo Takanaka was, right? But I had to go along with this plan to kill 90% of the world's population, because they needed to do that in order to save the environment, right? And they said if I didn't, they were going to kill me, right? So a few days later, I get a call from a Japanese movie director, and I go to another hotel room, and this time I meet someone who says he's from an Asian secret society, and they have 6 million members and several 100,000 assassins, and they could help, but that the society couldn't be used for personal benefit. It could only be used for the greater good. You can imagine, this is like, I'm just kind of like dazed and confused, and, it's like really taking the red pill, right? I mean, this was, until that time, I was completely mainstream, superficial Gestalt person, right?
Right.
And suddenly all this stuff hits me, and I did a lot of thinking, and I had what I call my Kill Bill moment. The movie Kill Bill, there's these two women fighting, and it's really, no one knows how it's going to end. It's a really tough fight, and suddenly
Absolutely, yeah.
she grabs the eye and pulls it out, and fight's over. And I realized that most Western people would be absolutely appalled if they'd heard there was a plan to kill 90%, including most of them and their own families, right? And that the weakness of this group was that they were highly centralized, and there was very few of them. So I gave the Asian group a list of names. These were people who were on the Bilderberg, Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission. And I said, if you target these people, you can put an end to this plan to kill 90% of the world's population. And this is, and then around that time this was going on, David Rockefeller came to Japan for what was supposed to be publicity for his biography, which is coming out in a Japanese translation. And there was a large bookstore that suddenly a bunch of men in black shut down all the entrances, right?
Right.
And David Rockefeller made himself available to sign his biography to readers, right? And somebody sent me a photograph from this event saying David Rockefeller's in town, right? And I've been a correspondent talking to Western elites for a couple of decades in Tokyo, and I knew where they stayed. They either stayed at the Imperial Hotel or the Okura, right?
Right.
And years ago, for example, I'd also interviewed Paul Volcker, and at the time there was a rumor that Paul Volcker was in town. I called up the Imperial Hotel and said, "Is Paul Volcker staying there?" And suddenly they said, "Wait a minute." And then the phone turns, "This is Paul Volcker speaking." It's like, whoa, I actually got the man,
Very
So
well.
I had this experience, this background. So what I figured is, okay, he's going to be at either the Okura or the Teikoku. Probably the Okura because it's across the street from the U.S. Embassy. So I waited until 10 o'clock at night, which I figured he'd still be awake, but his handlers would have been gone to their own rooms. And I called, and I got him directly. And he agreed to interview me the next morning. And that's how I got that interview.
Very interesting. Yeah, you conducted a lot of fantastic interviews with some, I guess you could say, very dangerous people.
Oh yeah, I mean these people. I mean, I've survived 5 very close calls, assassination attempts. God knows how many, not so close calls. These are serious people.
Very
this
serious.
Is not, I had no choice. Okay, but you have to deal with some very nasty, dangerous people when you're talking at this high level, where assassination is just another tool in the toolbox, with these people. But I think the reason I'm still alive is that, I made it clear that all I'm trying to do is save the planet. I'm not out there to get bad guys. I'm not out there to, I'm just trying to change this system that's destroying the, natural world we live in.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of them realize that. I wasn't out to get them. I was out to try to convince them to change the way they run this planet.
yeah, you basically spoke to the Committee of 300.
Yeah, look, since that happened, that interview and all that stuff, all sorts of people popped out of the woodwork. I got contacted by a group that called themselves the Gnostic Illuminati, and they said that they were founded by Pythagoras and that they had started the French, Russian, and American revolutions, that they were against bloodline rule. And I was contacted by MI6, CIA, KGB, North Korean secret police, et cetera, the assassins. And perhaps the other really interesting group is, the Leo Zagami showed up.
Yes, let me.
Lodge.
Yes, yeah. I definitely want to preface this just a tiny bit. And of course, I told you in a private email, a lot of these factions I read about or was told about so many years ago, and I always thought, well, most of these must be embellished to some degree. But after doing more research and doing a lot of research on you, Benjamin, and some of the things that you have, some of the interviews that you conducted, it really solidified a lot of these things people have been saying in the past, but you really solidified it for me personally.
Okay. Well, Zagami said he was also from a group called the Illuminati, but it was clearly not the same as the Gnostic Illuminati, because he said they were the bloodlines of the Caesars, and that they controlled the Vatican and the mafia, and then he said a lot of weird esoteric stuff, like that they did, like when you see in the movies where they draw like a pentagon on the floor,
Sure.
and they light candles and they chant stuff. These guys actually do that sort of stuff.
A ritual, yes.
And they believe that they invoke entities, and he told me, some pretty creepy stuff, like he'd once eaten a human fetus, and that they sacrificed children. It's all, really creepy stuff. Okay.
Yes, and on the last episode of this program, for those that are just listening in right now, I interviewed Leo Zagami, and he mentioned you in passing, Benjamin, and it wasn't in the most flattering fashion. So I'm very curious to what your relationship is and why you had this sort of falling out with Leo. And in your email, you told me something pretty heavy about him.
All right, I'll tell you. There's a lot to tell, but
no doubt.
We'll start. He came to Japan to visit me, right? And after I'd sort of told the Asian Secret Society that was how to deal with the problem, right? And he came with this blonde American woman who said it was his girlfriend. And after he left, she was supposed to go to Okinawa to help, organize a reggae concert. And then she phoned me saying, this black man who was organizing a conference said I had to have sex with him or else, and what should I do? And I said, well, get the hell out of there. Get in a taxi, go to the airport and leave, right? And then I'll put you up in my lady friend's house if you have nowhere to stay, right?
Right.
And then Zagami calls and says, I want that man killed. If you don't kill him, I'm going to send 2 murderers from Sicily to kill him, right? So I tell the Japanese authorities about this, and let me tell you, the real authorities are no distinguishable from the Yakuza gangsters, okay? At the high level, we're dealing with, it's all the same people, but anyway, they said that what they would do is they would take the assassins to the person, and they could do it themselves. They're not going to do it for him. And then he just dropped the whole thing. And when I went to Italy, and I met this lady, she said the whole thing was fake. Okay, it was some kind of way to entrap me. They're trying to get me to do something, so that they could. Anyway, the whole thing was some sort of fake event. Anyway, I went to Italy later to meet the P2 people, and I was taken around by Zagami, and he showed me that he could basically walk in and around St. Peter's and like he owned it, and he'd go in behind back doors, and it was clearly like, we're in charge here. And he told me they were going to get rid of Pope Benedict, and they did. Okay. And then he said that the highest ranking person he could introduce me to was someone by the name of Vincenzo Mazzara, who was a cavalier of the Teutonic Knights. Right?
Right.
So I went to Milan to meet him, and he said, "Do you mind if I smoke a cigar?" And I said, "No, go ahead." And the whole day he's taking me on a tour. He kept blowing smoke at me, right?
Wow.
And he took me to the cathedral in Milan. He said, "Look," pointed to this stained glass window of the Black Sun. He says, "This is our god, the Black Sun." And it was like a black thing, and around it, colors were coming out, right? And then he showed me photographs of these entities, not old paintings. And these are the gods we take our orders from. And he said that they're communicated via the gamma waves, right? And I tell you, when I was in that cathedral, it was a very strange, subjective thing that happened to me. But it was as if the entire building disappeared, and I was standing on a like white cloud, staring at a black void. It's not just dark, but it was cold. It was like anti-life. It's just, it was very, very draining experience. But anyway, I left, I finished the tour, and he was supposed to meet me the next morning at 10 o'clock in the morning. But that night, I had an incredible attack. My lungs seized up. I nearly died, okay? It was like I couldn't breathe. But I survived. The next morning, he didn't show up at 10 o'clock when we were supposed to. So I called him up and said, "Why aren't you here?" And he says, "You're still alive?" Like he's really surprised.
Wow.
And later I got called by the CIA, who said they'd been monitoring my whole visit, right? And they said that, they had recorded a conversation where Zagami had met the Agnelli brothers, right? And they asked Zagami to leave the room. And then these Agnelli brothers, these are people in Fiat, they also own The Economist magazine, said, Zagami is going to expose the emperor. And he was talking to Victor Emmanuel, theoretically Rome doesn't have a king now, but this was the sort of stuff that I was dealing with. And these are the people who carry out the Davos thing, for example. And the CIA told me that Zagami was not my friend. And I certainly I left Italy a very sick man, and it took me a couple of weeks to recover. But believe it or not, I now have friendly communications with Vincenzo Mazzara, and I'm trying to convince these, Italian esoteric nobility to go along with this plan to fix the planet, But
Right.
Zagami told me a lot of other things that, at the time I couldn't figure it out. But he said, for example, the U.S. president is called the acting president because he's an actor. He reads the script, right?
Right.
And, watching what's been going on since then, I had to, come to a conclusion. This is true. These people, they don't have real power. They read scripts.
No doubt. No president actually holds any sort of power here in America. It's mostly those behind certain groups, as, for instance, a shadow government is actually implemented, which is controlling most of America and most of the world.
Sure. Well, that's the other thing I found out. Remember, I've talked to every Japanese prime minister since the 1980s and all sorts of other world leaders. And the thing I found out from multiple sources is that when you become a leader or a head of a central bank or probably a finance minister of a large country, you get a visit from someone from the Vatican Bank. And they have a little bank book, and they say, which is a huge amount of money. It may be 100 million or a billion, depending what sort of rank you are. They say, "Welcome to the Rich Person's Club. This is money that you can use, but if you don't do what we say, we're going to kill you." Right? This is a classic, silver or lead choice.
Right.
And that's how they control the politicians we see on our TV sets. This is another thing I found. Again, I deal with this directly firsthand. I mean, I got that offer myself, and I chose the bullet and dodged it. That's basically what they do.
Yes,
And that's
and
how.
I'm still blown away, Ben, by the way, that you have been in good relations with this gentleman who tried to have you, or that tried to whack you, in other words.
Well, it wasn't personal, right? And
Sure.
he
Okay.
represents a very powerful group with access to esoteric information I can't get elsewhere, And certainly talk to him to a long distance via email and stuff is safe enough, But, you have to deal with unsavory types when you want to get information. I mean, some of the people I've met give me the heebie-jeebies. I've met a couple
Sure.
people personally murdered more than 100 people each. And it creeps you out. But if I want to find out what's going on, you got to talk to these people.
Yeah, you got to cross those lines.
For example, these are people who murder the politicians for the ruling secret families. And if you don't talk to them, you don't find out what's going on.
Very true. Very true. So I'm curious now, when was the last time you talked to Leo?
I didn't talk to him, but he sent me an email inviting me to some sort of conference in a church in England a few weeks ago. That was supposed to discuss the true leadership and power of the planet and something. And I contacted the British authorities and suggested that they arrest him because, at a certain point, he'd been plotting to murder the entire British royal family, and that was the last we contacted.
Understood. And in terms of individuals trying to take your life, when was exactly the last time one of these situations unfolded for you, my friend?
Last time I think it's actually a few years ago. I had a speaking event. It was 2000 and I can't remember. It was a few years ago. I had a public speaking event in Yoyogi, Tokyo, and this man came up to me afterwards, said, "You're really great. Can I shake your hand?" And he stabbed me with a poison needle.
Ooh.
And I immediately started sucking the blood out of the wound, and I got called by friends of Christopher Story, a fellow journalist who had been murdered by a similar method, and they told me that if I took large doses of vitamin C and D, like 5,000 units of vitamin D per day and a gram or 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C every 6 hours, right away, that I could stop it. And that's what I did. And I since found out the assassin was a guy by the name of Mutsuaki Okubo. He's a North Korean. There were many witnesses to this event. I went to the Japanese police. They didn't take any action, and they still haven't, But this is the last time they tried to kill me that I'm aware of.
Understood. And of course, this leads me to ask you another question about another gentleman by the name of Robert David Steele, who you interviewed yourself out there in Japan. I interviewed Robert myself. I found him to be a pretty interesting individual in his own right. What exactly is your take from Mr. Robert David Steele?
I think that he represents an independent attempt by the Pentagon and the U.S. Marines to figure out what exactly is going on. That they've set up their own intelligence operations because they didn't trust the CIA, and they're trying to find out directly themselves what's going on. And I think he came to see me as part of that process. The military trying to independently find out exactly what's happening.
Understood.
And he's a very smart man, and
very
he
smart,
has good, practical, down-to-earth ideas about how to, improve the way we manage the planet. And I introduced him to some Asian secret society types to see if we couldn't, start implementing some of his ideas, at least the Chinese, when they decided to modernize their economy, they started by fencing off an area near Hong Kong and trying an experimental thing first, right, to see if it
Right.
works. And I suggested they do the same with his ideas of open source, economics. And they could make a zone maybe along the North Korean border, someone to try this out. And that might happen, but there's still right now there's this deadlock between the Eastern and Western secret societies, and that hasn't quite. You noticed this week, Chinese President Xi Jinping, he canceled his summit with Trump, U.S. President Donald Trump, and instead he's going this week to Italy, and he's going to be going to, I think, Monaco. So he'd be meeting the Italian P2 Freemason type summit. That's the only reason to go there.
Right.
But these negotiations are ongoing. And the latest I heard is that they're actually trying to come up with some sort of world federation government. That's what they're trying to do.
It's very interesting. Robert does have plenty of interesting ideas, an open source government being one of them. And while it's a good idea, I don't think those in charge would really feel the same way and want to implement an open source government. Excuse me. Yes.
If you use the scientific method, you do an experiment and see what happens, right? That's why I suggested they create a special zone to try this out and see what it works. And the other thing is that traditionally the Chinese economic system was sort of open source. They didn't have patents or anything. If people wanted to keep proprietary information secret, they kept it secret. But there wasn't any sort of systematic protection, and copying stuff was like normal. Now, I don't know if that's a good system or not. I think what you need to do is you try it in a restricted zone and see if it works better. And just be pragmatic about it.
Understood. And I agree with you full-heartedly. I would love to see something like that implemented here in the States. However, man just lies way too much to have that, especially if it's going to be something that the government is going to run. And we both know our government here, well, my government here in America tells plenty of lies, my friend.
Well, they've told so many lies now that they've kind of painted themselves into a corner. I mean, the Mossad saying is thou shalt wage war through deceit or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but they obviously never heard the story about the boy who cried wolf. That works for a while, but eventually people just stop believing it, and that's what's happening now. Their attempts to manipulate us are falling apart in real time. And at the end of the day, freedom of the press and accurate information is essential to a healthy society. If people don't know what's really going on, they can't make informed decisions. And people aren't dumb. If they have accurate information, they usually come to pretty good conclusions about it. And that's why we need to end this system of lies and fake events and secrecy and all that kind of stuff, and have, once again, a very transparent system. It's just healthier.
Agreed, and we'll jump into that in a moment. And Benjamin, are you affiliated with any groups currently right now?
I have been. I joined the Asian Secret Society at the very beginning because they offered me protection at a time when some very dangerous people were trying to kill me.
Which is needed, yes. Yeah.
And they asked me to contact any Western groups who agreed with their wish to stop this attempted genocide. You see, the Chinese had eavesdropped one of the Bohemian Groves meetings and found out about this plan to kill 90% of the world's population. So they asked me to contact Western groups that would, agree that this had to be stopped. And, as a Asia Pacific bureau chief for what was then the world's largest business magazine, and my father was a diplomat, an ambassador, my grandfather was a politician in Canada, I had a lot of connections. So I contacted all sorts of people, and
right.
I've, got people from the Gnostic Illuminati, the KGB, or I guess they're called FSB now. all sorts of different people agreeing with our plan to, change the system. So right now I'm talking to all sorts of groups, but at the end of the day, I'm still like a lone wolf independent journalist.
Independent, right?
But I'm self-financing, and I've turned down astronomical bribes. But I'm in contact with all sorts of groups right now, and I call this umbrella the White Dragon Society. But it really has people from the military, from the CIA, from North Korea, from the Japanese, from all sorts of people who agree that we need to, have a healthier way of running this planet, and we need to stop the ongoing ecocide. We've wiped out 50% of species since the 70s, something like that. Largest extinction event since the dinosaurs were wiped out 65 million years ago, and it's caused by humans. And we need to stop this. And I think we're getting a consensus that's saying, yes, we need to do something. But yeah, I'm associated with all sorts of groups. But at the end of the day, I've always been an independent journalist. I never joined one when I was young or anything like that. I was always a lone wolf.
Very good. Very good. I know many people in the media and other individuals out there have tried to drag your name through the mud multiple times, multiple smear campaigns on you, Ben.
Oh, I mean, they've tried to entrap me so many times. Another time, somebody showed up with 70 kilograms of tainted marijuana, and it was tainted with with PCP or something very dangerous. And they said, if you don't introduce the Japanese mob, we're going to kill you. And at the same time, they banned my books and cut off all my income. And they promised me $10,000 a month just for making an introduction, right? And it turns out the stuff was, if I'd been smoking, I would have destroyed my brain, okay? It was full of dangerous chemicals, and they told me it was a trap. And, I didn't make the introduction. But apparently the plan was they're going to say, Benjamin Fulford used to be a good journalist, but then he started getting drugs and became a drug dealer, and now he's in jail. This is one of many attempts, and the honey traps they send me, oh boy, I could go on for hours about just that. But at the end of the day, the honey brings a trap with you. They send these beautiful women into your life, but at the end of the day, they're trying to get you into a compromising situation. And they've written things like I was placed by a clone, I work for the Rockefellers, all sorts of crazy stuff. But
for the CIA.
They never come to my face with this stuff, always behind my back, because if they come to my face, I can, accuse them of slander. And I have written misinformation and wrong stuff because they fed it to me. And as soon as I find out, I issue a correction and an apology. And I'll keep doing that, because sometimes stuff slips past my, sensors or my,
sure,
my BS detector. But when that happens, I later find out, and correct
your mistakes.
That's what journalists do. That's what newspapers do. That's what you're supposed to do.
That's smart. Yeah, and for those that don't know, the Yakuza, they are basically involved with everything. For a short time, once I guess you could say, the normal folks out there in Japan realized with one, for an example, there was a mixed martial arts company called Pride back in the day, and the Yakuza got involved, and once the networks caught wind of that, they took their TV contract away, which is weird because there's so many different things in politics out there. It's quite crazy.
Look, the Yakuza, I could go on. I've known so many of them for so many years. I've been friends with the son-in-law of the big boss of the Yamaguchi Gumi, which is the world's largest crime syndicate for more than a decade. I could go on and on about this, but let me just say that there's a couple things you need to know about them. First of all, a lot of them represent what you call defeated military clans. Okay, for example, the Japanese military and spy network, they lost World War II, but they have a network that's still sort of there. And then there are people involved in traditional criminal activities like gambling and money laundering and prostitution, all that kind of stuff, right? Just business, right?
Mm-hmm.
But The thing you need to know is that the Americans sort of subcontracted the control of the Japanese political system to these crime gangs ever since World War II. And so a lot of them worked for the CIA and subcontract for the Pentagon, including the North Koreans. Okay, this is the sort of stuff you don't find out from reading the newspaper.
True. Very true. Lots of things the American people don't know in regards to what's going on in Japan. And of course, anytime I think of Japan, I instantly think of Fukushima. And of course, all the nuclear reactors in the United States and how I'm close to
Okay.
one out here. Go ahead.
I was deeply involved in the whole Fukushima thing from before it happened. And I do want to talk about this because it's really important.
Yes, sir.
I can prove this in a court of law. I was approached by a gentleman who calls himself Alexander Romanov. He goes by various aliases. I know his real name, but let's just say he was a drug dealer for a drug smuggler. He smuggled in like 100 kilos of hashish to Japan every month or so on a yacht.
Good
right?
times, yes.
And one time he was called to Pattaya in Thailand, where he was blindfolded, taken to a place where he met some military types who showed him a nuclear weapon. And was stolen from the Russian submarine Kursk, which sank in 2000. And they told him that he had to smuggle it in to Japan with his next shipment of drugs. This guy was like a sleeper agent, and they woke him up, right?
Right.
So they took this weapon, which, into Japan from the Philippine Yacht Club, and then into a remote Japanese island where it was put on a fishing boat. Then it was taken by truck to former Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone's property, and he came to me and said, they're smuggling a nuclear weapon into Japan. They're going to use it for nuclear terrorism, right? And he became a whistleblower. And I contacted Japanese police and all sorts of places. I wrote about it saying they're going to do something, nuclear terror against Japan, and nobody did anything. And then we followed this weapon to the North Korean Citizens Organization, which is like an unofficial North Korean embassy. And from there, it was taken aboard the deep sea drilling ship, the Chikyu. Okay? And again, Alexander Romanov, he was an Australian secret agent. And he went to the Australian embassy and said they're about to do a nuclear terror attack against Japan. And the day after he went to the Australian embassy, Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd was dismissed from office by the Federal Reserve, according to Australian secret police. In other words, by these Italian types,
Right.
we're talking about earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there were local news reports saying that the deep sea drilling ship, the Chikyu, where the bomb had been taken aboard, was drilling off the coast of Fukushima. And we had we still have under protection a member of the Japanese Self-Defense Forces who was involved. He said that they divided the weapon into 5 smaller weapons. It was a 500 kiloton weapon, okay? And they drilled him 10 kilometers into the seabed. He thought it was some kind of earthquake research. And when the tsunami happened and he realized what happened, all his colleagues who'd been involved in this job were murdered one after the other. And he went to a Christian church for shelter, and he's been sheltered by Christian groups to this day. But he published a detailed book in Japanese about exactly how this happened. And the other thing you need to know is that the Japanese authorities were ordered out of the Fukushima nuclear reactor before this tsunami event, and an Israeli company by the name of Magna BSP was put in charge of security. And in fact, they put a small nuclear weapon there to blow up the plant. So this was a terrorist attack against Japan by the P2 Freemason Roman types, and it was because the Japanese were planning to use their $7 trillion in money they'd earned since World War II, selling cars and TVs to the world to finance a project to help the planet. And so it was an extortion against Japan. And after that, the CSIS, Richard Armitage, Michael Greenberg, and Gerald Curtis, who's supposedly a Columbia University professor, but he's really CIA in Japan, they faked an election in Japan. All the votes were counted by company called Musashi, which was owned by the Council on Foreign Relations. And basically, they put Prime Minister Abe into power. And after the Fukushima event, they're sort of, and if you follow what the CIS is, Center for Strategic and International Studies, it's Georgetown University, and then that goes to the Vatican and those people again. Okay, so these are the people who staged this attack, and they're still clinging to power, but they're definitely losing the plot. They're under attack on multiple fronts. You can see that in all sorts of ways. The biggest and most obvious was when they used the anti-hijack mech override to knock down the Ethiopian Airlines flight, and suddenly there was a world boycott on Boeing. That's never happened before. And then Venezuela, their attempt at regime change there has failed. They're under attack like they've never been before, and they've been in power thousands of years. This is really historical stuff.
It's a very interesting time to be alive, indeed. So many things going on around the world right now. It's mind-boggling. And one thing I did want to ask you really quickly here was, what exactly is the perception of the Japanese in regards to President Donald J. Trump?
Well, the media here is under control of the same kind of people who control the New York Times and the Washington Post. So there's a sort of a hysterical anti-Trump media campaign, which has affected opinion here to a certain extent. So I'd say overall they don't like him. Okay, but that's because they're brainwashed. And I would say personally about Donald Trump, he's trying to make America great again, but the rest of the world doesn't just look at America. He needs to look at the world as a whole a bit more. That's my only, I know that they're trying to reform what's happening inside the U.S. and take down the deep state and put these criminals in jail. So I say, by all means, go for it. But we do have an entire planet to worry about. We still have this extinction event going on, and we need to do something about it. And what I've personally been pushing is, to set up a future planning agency with a multi-trillion-dollar budget to stop all this environmental destruction, put an end to poverty, and then sort of according to the American Academy of Sciences, more than 6,000 patents have been suppressed for so-called national security reasons. A lot of these could probably be safely introduced to the civilian population, and we could have an incredible economic boom, So anyway, getting back to that,
yes,
people understand that the current system isn't working and it needs to be replaced. And I think that a consensus is building that something new has to be done.
I agree with you. Yes. And one thing I did find very interesting on your website was your goal is to counter U.S. propaganda and expose the Japanese people to the truth. And you wrote that they may free themselves from the colonial yoke. And yes, the yoke, we are definitely born with yoke around our necks, like it says, and we are indeed enslaved by man's social constructs and in this very big broken system.
I'll tell you something. I've published more than 70 books written in Japanese, and a lot of them have been bestsellers. So the Japanese understand what's going on. I was approached, I tried to publish a book in English, and 11 publishers wanted to do it, including, all the big ones. And then they were all stopped. And finally, one company called, an Arizona publisher wanted to go ahead and publish anyway. And the U.S. Department of Homeland Security froze the entire publishing company's bank accounts.
Wow.
To prevent me from publishing my book in English. Because they don't want the people to wake up to what's happening. But I'll tell you, for what the sort of thing they don't want people to know, for example, the Japanese imperial family, when in the Meiji Reform, what happened was they take this 3,000-year-old, the oldest imperial family on Earth, and they had a Habsburg princess marry into the family. So it's a Jewish bloodline. This is the sort of thing they don't want you to know about.
Yes, bloodlines are very important for those that don't know yet.
And again, I'm not, I'm if the bloodlines, again, I'm not trying to say we don't need to end bloodline rule. I'm just saying, just fix the planet. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to overthrow these people. This has been going on thousands of years. Who am I to say, what I'm saying is, we need to save the planet.
We do. That's true. I agree with you 100% on that assessment. And going back to the president really quickly here, I just want to say, no matter what anyone's opinion is on his character, he hasn't exactly had an easy run as the president whatsoever. He's had multiple lineup changes in his administration, and I'm sure that gets pretty exhausting for him and everyone else trying to keep up with all these things going on with him. And we've never seen an administration like this going in and out and replacing different people. It's phenomenal to see. It's
the Gnostic Illuminati against the bloodlines. That's my reading of the situation. Remember that Secretary of State John Kerry was in Antarctica.
Yes, John Kerry.
On election day. And I actually talked to someone who was there at the base. He's a relative of Admiral Byrd of Antarctic exploration fame and a senior CIA guy. He was there at the meeting. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead and explain that, because there's been lots of activity, lots of information and news that are coming from Antarctica. So I definitely want to hear your understanding.
He was told that a decision had been made to go ahead with Trump instead of Clinton. And apparently there was a shootout between special forces at the underground base in Denver Airport to take control of the election stealing machinery. And if you look at the election, it started out with Hillary winning, and suddenly it flipped, and everything went to Trump. So the people who had been all assuming that it was going to be Hillary Clinton, according to the plot, were completely flabbergasted. And since then, doing everything in their power to try to overturn this decision. And the battle continues to this day. It's a civil war at the highest level.
Yeah, it's interesting you said a civil war, because that's where I was going to take it to right now. You also said a Japanese member did not go to America to have some meeting, and that reminds me of what went on several months ago. When there was this gentleman by the name of Dmitry Rogozin from the Roscosmos. He's the director general. He canceled his trip to NASA because he said what he said, and I quote, "I think America is now consumed by what is essentially its second civil war." Very interesting to say, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you another weird thing. Okay, a lot of this rabbit hole stuff I don't know yet. I'm still trying to figure out, but
don't worry, me too.
A guy from the Defense Intelligence Agency who was, from their psychic warfare group, the men who stare at goats.
Yes.
He said that NASA stood for not a space agency. Okay. I don't want to go deeper down that rabbit hole. I just don't know, but it's one of these many things that I'm not sure what to deal with. Like, I have a lot of stuff I can't figure out that's going on, but something fundamentally different is happening, to the way this planet is running. That's all I can say. And the cutoff of NASA funding for 35 days is clearly part of this. Apparently they've got their funding back, but it may not continue. The battle is still raging.
Understood. And I don't mean to completely jump off track here, but I'm also aware that you, at one point, were regularly in communication with the gentleman. I believe his name is David Wilcock. Are you still talking to him at all?
Well, sometimes. I mean, I forwarded him a bunch of information to him about the Kennedy assassination and the plan that Kennedy had to, start a big campaign for the planet and how it was stopped and he publicized that, but we don't communicate that regularly. I know that he comments on my comment section and stuff, but I try to stay away from the alien and space stuff for a very simple reason that I can't go to a local spaceport and get a plane to a rocket to another planet. I can't go to a local portal and visit another dimension.
Sure.
And I think we have to deal with what we can see here and now, and try to focus on that. And the other thing is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof.
Evidence.
And
Right.
a lot of that stuff, I just don't see the proof there.
Indeed. I'm also asking you this because I know long ago you also had interviewed, like Simon Parks, who is,
Mhm.
he also described his experience with several alien beings. And, of course, he's an interesting gentleman, that's for sure. He's made, like you just said, some very extraordinary claims, but has not presented empirical evidence to back up these said claims. Now, I'm curious now what your experience and your take is of Mr. Simon Parks.
Well, when it comes to talking about the system in place now and what's happening to the planet, we agree very much, and I think that this whole alien thing is, well, if the mothership lands on the White House lawn and stuff, and then it becomes real, fine. But I think we're the best analogy I can give is that they're like National Geographic cameraman, and they don't interfere between the zebras and the lions, and it's up to the zebras and the lions to sort it out among themselves. I think that's sort of the situation we're at. We're there's clearly some kind of non-interference thing going on, or they're not supposed to. But I just don't. I don't see these aliens on the duty-free store. It just doesn't seem to impact. I think at a more esoteric level, I think that the trans-dimensional beings influence human thought patterns. Okay, I'm willing to go that far.
That's okay. It is unusual, though, when you have psychics like Ingo Swann, who definitely did have involvement with the remote viewing project for the CIA. Going back to Project Stargate, where they definitely did remote view Jupiter, if I recall correctly.
Sure, but
weird stuff.
Again, a lot of that stuff's very interesting, but does it help us in here and now?
Not really.
Another thing I want to tell you is that when I started writing about the families that owned the central banks and stuff that were privately owned, they weren't government entities. Suddenly, again, all my income was cut off, and I was, blacklisted from everywhere. And the only places I could get money was if I'd go to like a UFO conference and talk or something like that. And then there were people going around to everybody I'd known as a Forbes journalist saying, Benjamin Fulford's got crazy. He's taking drugs.
That's what they, that's what they do. They try to bunch you in with other individuals who've made outrageous comments throughout the past as well. And that's definitely how they try to discredit you.
Well, what they do is they take real information and they add wacko stuff to it so that people will disregard the real information.
Right.
Like, for example, I don't like to, David Icke has done a great job in many ways, but I actually listened to his presentation. He talks about all the families that own the Federal Reserve Board, like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and stuff. And that's very, very well documented. You could write, you could prove that and forensically in any court of law, right?
Understood,
and
yes.
There's incredible information backing this up. But then he says that above them are these shape-shifting reptilians. And what's his source? Some African lady he talked to or something like that. You know what I mean? It's like, wait a minute. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Why are you tacking this on to the, it's like they're trying to get people not to believe it by, mixing crazy information with real information so that people will reject the real information.
Understood. And another individual who David Icke clearly lifted material from is Jordan Maxwell, who I've met personally and had lunch with him, and we had a long discussion about David Icke and a lot of the things that he took from Mr. Maxwell. And Jordan is actually the one who brought him to America. So it's kind of strange.
Right, so I want to get back to David Wilcock too. About
Okay,
there's one of his
go
stories
ahead.
is a guy called Corey. Source is a guy called Corey Good,
Corey
and
Good, yes.
he was feeding me stuff about Antarctica, how they found a frozen city and things,
Hmm.
right? And uh, I wrote about it a bit, but then I said, okay, well that's incredible, and so I convinced a Chinese TV station to charter a plane to go down and see for ourselves, right? And suddenly he backs off and says, "Oh no, no," it's like, you know what I mean? Like, if they say stuff, I'm a journalist. If it appears in writing, it means someone has beaten me to the story. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go to Antarctica myself and see it for myself. And when I try to do that, suddenly they back off. It's like, oh, Uh, and so that's why I stopped writing about that stuff, because they can't prove it.
And fair enough. I definitely would take the same route you did and get away from those that don't have any solid evidence to prove a lot of these claims. Very smart to try to break away from these types, no doubt.
But I don't want to get involved in mudslinging. That's just debilitating. So I just try not to get involved. If people
Understood.
attack me, I
Yeah.
kind of ignore it as to them, and just continue with my job. But if somebody slanders me, then I'm forced to,
You have to
defend
respond.
myself.
No doubt. That's what you definitely have to do, especially in today's climate where anything you say, anyone can get offended with it. And, here in America, someone gets offended with anything you say, they could just go to Twitter and then get you fired, hopefully, in their
Yeah,
minds.
that's gone way too far. I mean,
It's
for
extreme.
example, I have Jewish ancestry, but I'm not hypersensitive. If they say, I think people should develop thick skins.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
I'm with you.
and just don't get into that kind of, just don't sink to their level.
Yeah, I'm
My
with you on that
grandmother
one.
once told me, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And I think that's really good advice.
Oh, yes. And of course, no good deed goes unpunished, which is
Mm,
another great one that has proven true throughout the years. And Benjamin,
mm.
by the way, speaking of your family and grandparents and all of that, were you raised at all religious?
No, my father was an atheist. My mother was an agnostic. So no, but I've been forced by dealing with this stuff. I have to, be reading the Bible and stuff, because
Sure.
this is these are I'm dealing with the actual people who probably wrote the Bible, and are still in control to this day. I mean, so I've been forced to get into all this stuff, because we're dealing at the end of the day with the people who control monotheism and the families and that. So now I'm getting involved in it, but I wasn't brought up religious. No.
Okay.
But I do believe there's a creator. We didn't create
Okay.
ourselves. Something else created us.
So-
And that means that to respect the creator, we should respect the creation, which means, respecting other humans and respecting nature. And I think even an atheist can agree that much.
Yes. Where would you classify yourself exactly? I consider myself an agnostic atheist.
I'm kind of trying to be spiritual in the true sense of the word, where you have direct experience with for example, if you meditate, you could actually directly contact the source, if you want to call it the energy of the universe, whatever. But I'm focused on the real world, and
Sure, I hear you.
and I'm not. And there's a Sufi saying, I don't serve God like a servant and expectations of my wages. I'm not trying to get an afterlife ticket to heaven or anything like that. I'm doing good because it's common sense, it's practical, it's pragmatic, not because I want to avoid hell or get heaven. I just
Certainly. But Ben, do you believe in like an afterlife though?
I'll find out when I die.
Great answer. Great answer. Yes, that's kind of like myself in terms of being an agnostic atheist. There's some days where I don't believe in a God at all, and then there are days where I truly believe. At times, there's certainly something out there, not in terms of a human like me or you more like a source of energy, something to that nature, to that strange degree, something that the human mind can't even
I think
comprehend.
we live in a digital construct of some sort. If you go back to the very foundations of philosophy, right, is why does anything exist at all?
True.
And the answer is you can't have nothing unless there's something to contrast it with. So it's like zero, one, black, white, good, evil. It's like a binary system. So it is a kind of a digital construct. And I believe that if that's the case, we should be able to hack reality in and of itself. I know that's pretty way out there, but I think that's something that we might be getting the power to do. For example, we can now start to change our genes as we wish. So in theory, for example, the technology should be available so I could turn myself into a whale and swim around the oceans and then come back and turn myself back into a human. It's now, that sort of power is now entering the real world. So we're heading for something totally unknown. That's my view on things. It's something just never happened before.
I think you're right, because there was some Chinese scientist who had made these gene edited twins.
Yeah, and the other thing that's weird is that, okay, I put a little piece from the newspaper, right?
Uh-huh.
What is it? What is it? Oh yeah. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicines issued a report concluding that editing genes must not happen. Okay? It's like, who the hell are these people? Where'd they come from? Who finances them? Why, wouldn't you want to be able to edit your genes so you could live to be 1,000 years old?
100%.
Or have better eyesight, And who are these people who are forbidding us from improving ourselves? And who gives them that power and that right,
Very true. Why would you be against something that would help humanity for...
And they come up with stories like, well, that would create, haves and have-nots. Well, we can make them all haves. We can make, everybody have it. So, their arguments just don't work.
Yeah, they say you're playing God.
Well, if God didn't want us to play God, he'd stop us.
Agreed.
But we've got to be careful and responsible. I agree with that. We don't want to, I think the example was the cane toads in Australia. They released them in the wild and then it started destroying Australian wildlife. And we don't want to have unintended consequences. I agree with them on that. But, we should definitely push for immortality and superpowers in this world, not in the next, No,
I agree. We definitely should have something like that would save humanity now and for the next generations. No doubt.
They're everything. It's like a taboo. Anything to improve ourselves. So, for example, anybody who uses an enhancing medicine is banned from the Olympics and considered a criminal. Or and over the years, I've been reading science magazines, and every time they come up with something that can prolong life, they say, oh, but this, there'll be no demand for it. So a couple of years ago, Harvard researchers found a simple protein that could make the 60-year-old mice equivalent to like 20-year-old equivalent. And then I said, just wait and see. And sure enough, a while later, it came out that it would have to cost $50,000 a day. Which is a simple protein. Come on. Somebody or something out there doesn't want us to improve or get smarter or stronger. It's like we're okay. I'll give you a metaphor. I think that might be appropriate. I once visited a pig farm in Japan, and they have all these pigs. There are one huge old pig, he's like 60 years old, and he's the breeding male, and then there's these giant females, and then there's these piglets, and the piglets suckle and eat, and then when they're about 1 year old, they go onto a truck and off they go, and they don't know where they go,
Yeah.
Right? And I think that maybe we're like those little piglets, they're keeping us deliberately short-lived and ignorant because there's something, using us like some kind of farm animal. I mean, no, that's a bit crazy, but why else would they prevent us from, enhancing, like living longer or getting smarter? Who's doing it and why?
Yes, and that goes along with a lot of things I thought were important, and so do people in sports. For
Hmm,
example, HGH, which
hmm,
is, not allowed in most sports. Well, in all major sports, you can't be on the steroids. You can't be taking
hmm.
human growth hormone. But for the older folks, this sort of thing will actually extend your life.
Yeah, again, they're trying to stop this from happening for some reason. And I think that the forensic trail, and this does lead to Milan, Italy, and Zug, Switzerland, and places like that. Um, and that's where we need to, press to find out what's going on and try to liberate humanity.
I agree. Definitely,
Okay.
we need to take it up there. What were you going to say? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying. I think I have to start my day here. So if there's anything you want to
Oh
conclude with, I
yes,
think.
let's wrap it up pretty soon here. So definitely let's get into some of the current news before we take it off here. Tragedy struck yet again, this time in New Zealand, and of course it was all captured live and streaming. Very rough stuff to watch if you are easily sensitive, and of course this sort of footage can disturb lots of individuals out there. But of course now we hear that this footage wasn't exactly genuine from some folks out there in their perspectives. They think this was all faked. Benjamin, what's your take?
When I wrote my weekly report, I still wasn't sure, but I'm now leaning towards the opinion that this is a computer graphic fake event designed to manipulate public opinion. And there's a lot of that going on. I mean, they carry out these things, and but what's happening is that it's not having the effect it used to have. Like, people are getting numb to it. It's not working anymore. Like mass shootings and then media reports about it we're getting numb to it. You know what I mean? And then a
We
lot of
really
them
are.
are being proven to be fake. And I think that they're really losing their traditional brainwashing tools. More and more people are waking up and realizing that this is just designed to manipulate public opinion.
And of course, internet service providers in New Zealand are blocking access to all kinds of websites out there. Of course, those that do not respond or basically refuse to comply to requests to remove the re-uploads of the shooter's original live stream.
What I think it's very important in this day, and I try to do this, is to have people that you've actually met once physically, and if they say, okay, I've met another person physically, that you use these sources. So, for example, I know that I have a friend who lives in Pittsburgh, very close to where they had the massacre in the synagogue there.
Right.
And this guy actually is kind of anti-Jewish, but he lives there. He was there at the time, and he said it was real. So that one I can confirm because I have a direct source. But a lot of the stuff I just don't know because and so I try to always have. So if you actually know somebody in New Zealand, that you've physically met before, that's how you get information in this day and age. Because the digital stuff is just so easy to fake now that if we're not careful, we're going to be losing touch with the reality. If we.
Definitely, that's something that we do need to have discernment about. And I saw the footage right before YouTube started pulling it down, and it looked pretty convincing to me. But then
Well,
when
I looked at
Mhm.
it, and a couple things struck me. First of all, I didn't see any blood, and the other was that usually, if people are being shot, like they're going to scream hysterically in fear, and that wasn't going on. Um, there was a lot of unnatural stuff about it, but I'm not going to make a final conclusion on that. I
No
just
doubt,
don't
it's
know
okay.
enough, but I'm getting suspicious at this point.
Yes, I did.
Uh,
I did see that footage of the bullets sort of disappearing.
yeah, but again, maybe here's where I'm going to get paranoid. Maybe somebody is trying to alter the real footage to make people think it didn't happen. You know what I mean?
True. Yes.
It's so again, you can go down a rabbit hole, and that's why I try to stick to things I actually see and experience with my own eyes. and so that I can be sure, right?
Right.
But I'll try to. I have an Australian friend who has spent a lot of time in New Zealand. I'll try to get people who are actually there to find out what really happened, because that's what you have to do these days.
Yeah, you definitely do. And of course, I saw the footage and I thought that's kind of strange the way the shooter moved and how he was so calm. It really did lead me to believe that he had some sort of training at possibly some Islamic terrorist group or camp, because he was known to travel. And
he was trained in Israel, according to my Pentagon sources. Um, and so it seemed, and if you look at the media campaign, right, that follows this event, it has two aspects: gun control and denouncing what they call white supremacy, right?
Right.
So, as a Latin saying goes, cui bono, who benefits from such an event? What's the agenda? And try to figure out from that, where it's coming from. Okay, well, it's been nice talking.
Oh, wait, Ben, before you leave, you have to give me one last one. In your opinion, the presidential candidates so far for 2020, we have people like Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and a very strange one in, I believe, is what's his name? Joe Biden, who's actually leading currently right now as a candidate to topple the rest. What's your take on the next election? Will President Trump trump these people, or will we see someone rise to the level and take over?
What I'm hoping is that before you have your next election, that you have true freedom of the press and real debate so that people can make an informed choice again, and also rip out all that electronic voting stuff and go back to paper ballots so that the people can actually choose a genuine president. Right now, my best call is that they're all fake actors and none of them have any real power. And then if you want to restore the U.S. Republic, you're going to have to shut down the big media companies, break them up, and eliminate electronic voting. And then you can have a genuine president again. All
Understood.
Right, thanks for talking.
Yes, and before we cut you loose, Ben, anything you'd like to plug before we say goodbye?
Well, if you go to benjaminfulford.net, that's my subscription blog. That's how I earn a living, and you'll get information there, hopefully, that you won't find anywhere else. Because, as a journalist, if it appears in writing, then somebody has beaten me to the story, and I try to get stuff before anybody else, and I think I often succeed. So please subscribe and help me continue my work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ben. Take care.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye. And there he goes, ladies and gentlemen, Benjamin Fulford, with a very exclusive interview there. And I definitely hope all of you enjoyed that one. It was a bit of a classic there. And of course, I hate to do this, but it is that time to wrap up, folks. I'm very sorry about that, but we definitely will do Saturday night here. And of course, Dr. James Fetzer will be with me live and in the flesh, ladies and gentlemen. It will definitely be amazing. And of course, before we take it home, much respect to our international listeners out there. Got a lot of love for all of you in the UK and Canada and Brazil, Spain and Germany, and of course, Australia. And of course, those in Pakistan. I see some of you out there. I know exactly who you are. Amazing. I'm so glad you are all still out there, alive and well. Very dangerous to be out there in this time and age. And of course, I'd like to thank those at Deprogrammed Radio and Coming Right Up and the Fringe FM. And of course, those in the chat room. Incredible. I'm so glad you are here and not somewhere else. I'll be back on Saturday, folks. 7 p.m., same time, same bat channel. I'm Michael Decon, and with that said, the world is a mysterious place, and life itself is a mystery. Until next time, good night, everybody.